because it is.
Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to taking the next 15 to 20 minutes to chat with you about a topic that I know is definitely of interest to a lot of our families. And I think this is going to be a great resource to anyone who is potentially considering introducing memory care or memory care community to their loved one, or perhaps early on in the journey of establishing some relationships with memory care communities. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Jen Bavaro. I am the Director of Community Relations with Sunnyside Manor in Wall. We are a family-owned and operated senior living community. We have multiple neighborhoods within our community, Independence Plus Assisted Living. We also have a Medicare rehab and skilled nursing facility. And then, of course, we also have our assisted living with memory care, which is what we are focusing on today. So the purpose of putting this interview together with Amy, who is an expert in our field, is to be able to offer this as a resource for families. So before I go any further, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, Amy, and your background?
Certainly. I've worked in dementia care exclusively since 1990, so 33 years now. When I started in the field, there wasn't even a major in college for it. There wasn't a lot of specific dedicated care. So I kind of grew with the field, so to speak. My background ranges from home care to adult daycare for mid to late stage folks in the back of a church. That gives you an idea of how we started, to being the original activity director in the very first dementia specific assisted living in the country, and then later opening one that for the same company, a building in West Orange, New Jersey. I worked with the Alzheimer's Association for 14 years, and then had done work independently since then. But as I always say, my most important and valuable background is that my grandmother had vascular dementia, so I was also a caregiver for her.
Thank you. And you, for those individuals that are watching, you are not an employee at Sunnyside
No.
Manor by any means, but like all good individuals in their field that are always looking to grow and expand and learn, and no entity, no matter how long they've been around or how genuine their intentions are, we don't know everything. So there have been plenty of times where we've reached out to you as a consultant and said, Amy, can you help with this particular resident related matter? Or can you help in educating our families or prospective families on this, that, or the other, or staff on things? So thank you very much for that. And it's
Certainly.
good to always be able to go beyond our four walls for resources and, expertise in the community. So kind of on that same vein, how do you think, speaking of the, back of the church type of approach of
Right.
these, how do you think memory care has changed over the years?
Well, I think the biggest change certainly was that the only place you used to see any kind of memory care, before we even knew a lot about the diseases that cause the memory issues, was in nursing homes, and or behavior units, because folks were kind of seen as challenging back then. What's changed for the better? Certainly, the environments have gotten much better because we've learned so much more about the disease, and the fact that by adapting the environment, which is how people interact, the physical layout of an environment, and how we engage folks, we really can help maintain people better and longer. And then also regs have come along to be much better, for memory care in particular, and training. There are regs for ongoing training, annual requirements, and also to be able to define, if you have memory care in your setting, what makes it special, what makes it different. And that's important for families to know, because that's an important question. So what makes your memory care different from, anything else? And we need to be able to define that.
It's funny you should mention that, because a lot of the families, when they come in to tour with me, if I know that they're early on in their search, I take a few minutes at the beginning to talk about the senior living landscape and what that actually looks like, and what some of the differences are between like CCRCs and assisted living. And because I think sometimes we take for granted that people come in as educated consumers, and it's a highly emotionally charged time for these families if they're
Right.
looking. And knowledge is helpful for them. Although it's a
Exactly.
few minutes, it's enough to get them started. So I'm always pleasantly surprised when I can show families that what their parents thought of in the way of a memory care or nursing home environment back in their generation obviously has changed significantly. So,
Right.
what do you think families are most surprised by when they come to a memory care community, in particular, like if it's different from their expectation?
Mhm. Well, I think a couple things families are surprised by in my experience, and let me just qualify one thing you said before. We do, forgive this saying, give families too much credit to know things that there's no way they would know. Plus the fact that even if a family knows all this stuff, when it's your family member, everything you know goes out the window, and I can speak to that personally. So it's always good to hear that. In terms of the biggest surprises, I think one of the biggest surprises is how hard it is, for families. I think, um, you almost expect this sense of relief or I finally got help, but it really is one of the hardest things you ever do, to place someone and get help from other folks. And then the other thing I see as a surprise is, I'm going to use this term carefully, perceived improvement, because oftentimes if someone moves to a memory care setting from home, everything that they were failing at is now removed. So if someone was always going in the kitchen and turning on the stove and leaving things on because that's very much a part of who that person is and their long-term memory to cook. Now we have those things around in most memory care settings, but there you can turn the buttons all you want, but there's security there. It doesn't turn on unless something is switched or whatever. So there's this perceived improvement, not that the person has gotten better, but because we've now surrounded the person with the things they can do, as opposed to setting them up to fail with the things they can no longer do.
I love that. I've never thought of it that way, but it makes absolute sense. And I agree with you that placing a loved one in the care of someone else, even when you know that it is the next step for the person, it's still incredibly hard. I'm fortunate in that I've not had that personal experience, but I think back on even what it felt like, and I don't mean to make it sound elementary, no pun intended, but what it
Mhm.
felt like to drop my oldest son off at kindergarten the first day and hope that everything was going to go as planned, and that of course oftentimes they protest in much the same way. And so, that's kind of the one analogy that I can make,
Mhm.
in my own life. But I agree with you. So one of the things I know that's hard for families is learning to include kind of this new team of people um, in the relationship, and in the dynamic. So what are some things do you think that families can do to help themselves or their loved one, or maybe a little bit of both, to adjust to this
Mhm.
new normal, if we're allowed to use that word?
Yeah, I think absolutely, because new normal is fluid.
Yes.
It's always changing. So I think the first thing is, I think part of it comes back to us as the professionals, how we explain it. Oftentimes, I always say guilt, that's passed down from generation to generation. I'll never put you one of those places. I promise. I'll keep you home as long as possible. And so if placement is an option or need, um, to know that you're not going against a promise and you're not giving up care. I think that's the biggest thing I've seen families feel, is that we're giving up care. So I think as professionals, one thing we want to start from the get-go is, you're not giving up care. You're still the overseer of care. You just now have a team to help. So it's not a team that's taking over, it's a team to help. And we want your input. So I also think it's important for families to know, be as involved as you want to be or need to be. That's okay. But this is a team approach. No one person can do it, which is why oftentimes any change in care is typically the result of a crisis because one person can't do it.
Yes, it's so true. I tell, my coworkers sometimes when they're not necessarily as tuned into the process, I'll say, remember, there's usually a catalyst for
Mhm.
them seeking, the help of us or
Right.
someone like us. And so you have to be sensitive to the fact that this is coming on the heels of some kind of a catalyst. So
Exactly.
it's keeping that in mind is, certainly always helpful. So when somebody let's jump for a second to kind of the changing nature of things and the changing dynamic between families and their care team. If I was looking for my loved one and I was exploring memory care options, what might be some of the questions that I would ask or the things I would explore when determining what is the right fit or where is the right fit for
Right.
my loved one?
Well, I do think it's important to go to different places. In terms of questions to ask, I always advise families. First thing you want to do is give a scenario of the person's worst day, and then ask, how will you handle that? Not can you handle that, because you don't want a yes or no question. You want to ask questions that really require wherever you're looking to talk through how they may manage things and things they'll try. I think that gives you a good understanding of how people can think on their feet, and also that we are realistic, that not every day is great. Move-in doesn't make everything better, or even getting any help, whether it's in the home or moving into a care setting. But how will you handle it? I also think other questions that are important to ask are, um, understanding what a staffing ratio means. So that's a part for the family to ask that. How do you do, a 7-to-1 staffing ratio? But more importantly, how the professional answers that. It's not how many residents one person is responsible for, is how do you make it work? So in the explanation, 1 to 7 works because we're not getting 7 people up at the exact same time. 7 people don't bathe. We want to hear that it's more of a person-centered care, meaning that we schedule the day around each particular individual. So that's the question you want to ask, is how do you make that ratio work with all these folks and these different lives? Because we're not trying to make everybody the same. That's what you want to hear. And then what type of training do your staff have? There's certainly requirements for training annually in terms of dementia care, but what other training do you provide your staff? And how do you handle it if you've had a challenging behavior or situation? How do you handle that with your staff? How
Mhm.
is that a teachable moment? So things like that are what you want to ask, I think, most importantly, to get a sense for the level of expertise. And then, certainly, how often can I visit? What can I bring in? Can I bring in a favorite meal? And ideally, you want to hear things like, well, this is their home, so you can visit when you'd like. We'll work together on that.
I love that. I love that you led with explaining or sharing one of their worst or most challenging days, because I can't tell you how often families come in and they feel like they have to paint this perfect
Right,
picture because they think it's somehow a pass fail, right?
right,
Like if I don't tell the truth, they won't allow mom or dad or aunt or uncle, to come in. And
exactly.
we peel back the layers once there's some trust established. And I understand not wanting to walk in and share,
Right.
everything on day one, but once there's some trust established, because in the same way, a good establishment would never say every day is
Yeah,
fantastic. What do you mean?
exactly.
There's no such thing as challenging behaviors in memory care. And anyone who's sitting there who knows what they're talking about is like, you're joking me, right?
Exactly.
And it's
You're
the same
falling out of
thing
your
for the
chair.
loved one at home, right? Like there's
Yeah,
so I love that. It's definitely not a popularity contest. We need to
right.
see, because not every place is the right fit for everyone.
Exactly.
That is the genuine truth of it, is you
And
need to find.
as a family member, it's important to know how a facility is going to handle it.
Mhm.
Because while behaviors aren't necessarily unique, the individual with them is.
That's
And
right.
we need to have a good understanding of who that person was, what's different, and where we are now.
So touching on that, visiting, like one thing that the person would be interested in learning is access to their loved one. Obviously, the nature of time together changes when you're no
Right.
longer either living with the person or visiting them in a home environment. So, what might be some very, and I know this is a big topic, so certainly I understand this is more than probably we have time for, but what might be something that someone could take away from this interview together on how to really maximize the time that they get with their loved one in a memory care community?
Well, one thing, and I'll go back to my days from running a building, what I always would tell families is um, it's not about the frequency or intensity of a visit. When somebody has a memory loss disorder, they're very much in the moment. So the meaning of any visit is in the moment you're in it, not before, not after. And think about things that you always enjoy doing with the person or the person always enjoyed. And those are the things you're going to focus on. Sometimes the meaning is just in being. If you come in, stop in on your way home from work for 5 minutes and bring something the person loves, then it's a sense of you're visiting someone like you always did when they were more independent. And also for the person, the individual with a memory loss impairment, it gives that same sense. Um, because to put it, in very black and white terms, person's not going to remember that you were there or how long. So the meaning is in the moment you're there.
I love that. Managing expectations for them, for the family member, of course, I think is sometimes one of the most difficult things,
Yeah.
and adjusting to that. Um, I feel like we've probably already grabbed several really good nuggets that families can take with them. But as we wrap up, what might be a good, solid piece of advice that you would give to families when they're considering memory care as an option here or anywhere else?
Right. I think I have a couple pieces of advice. And again, I go back to my own experiences working with families and also as a family member. The first thing is I always say, be prepared for the worst and be pleasantly surprised because it is almost never as bad as you think it's going to be. But also give yourself credit, not guilt. There is a right place at a right time. Home isn't always the best place um, because even home becomes unfamiliar to the individual, and one person isn't meant to do it. We need a team. So I think those are the biggest pieces when looking at this and trying to step back, although it's very hard as a family member, from I'm doing this to the person or I need the person's permission. Because if the person were able to give the permission to get help, it wouldn't be a question. These diseases cause progressive brain damage. It's not fair to say, well, what do you think? Do you want to try it? Because the answer is going to be no, because the person's long term memory is saying, I'm fine and I can do everything the way I've always done it. And then, if I may just circle back real quick, because we did talk about adjustment and I didn't say anything. In terms of adjustment for the individual with dementia, first of all, the onus of adjustment is not on the person with dementia or the family. Because of progressive brain damage, the person with Alzheimer's or whatever related dementia that person may have, they will never adjust to any environment, including home. It is the environment that now must adjust to the person constantly. So, environment is the physical space, like we said, taking away things the person can't manage anymore. It's emotional, how we support the person, and it's social, how we engage the person. And my advice is always for any professional is treat everybody like they have a dementia, not in a rude way, but listen, validate, don't take things personally, and give the person, the family member, the same respect, dignity, and inclusion that you do the person that may be moving into your care.
Thank you so much. I love providing these opportunities. Selfishly, I love being the
Mm.
one to do it because I always feel like it, teaches me a lot. I always walk away from our conversations
Mm.
with things that I can share with families when I meet them for the first time or when they become part of our family, at
Mm.
Sunnyside. But thank you very much, and I'm really glad to be able to offer this to the existing families and then anyone who's possibly considering because it is not the easiest thing to navigate by any means. And, asking for some help is oftentimes the hardest first step. So Thank you
Exactly.
so much, Amy. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.